communication. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the fourth CCT Brown Bag. And I'd like to say too that I'm personally gratified to see how successful this series has been and the number of people that are beginning to show that we're outgrowing this room. And I'm choosing to take this as evidence that the interdisciplinary intellectual spirit is alive and well. I want to reflect just a moment on the vision of the gatherings. They're intended to be an exploration rather than a definitive discussion. And it helps us to explore rather than define and figure out where we're going as a center and what our place as individuals is in it. The focus of the fall semester, as you may know, focused on definitions of consciousness, whereas in the spring semester we're focusing on notions and definitions of transformation. And so this session today represents our first exploration into an understanding of transformation. The format is that the main speaker will speak for about 20 minutes or so, followed by two respondents who are given about 5 or 10 minutes, and the respondents are explorers or questioners. Our respondents for this afternoon are Drs. Ann Baker and Dr. Morrie Scherrens. And so what I'm going to do is introduce all three of our speakers so that once the discussion is flowing, I do not need to interrupt it with introductions. I'll start with Dr. Baker, who is an associate professor in the School of Public Policy. Is Dr. Baker here? In case those of you who don't know. She's been teaching in the Masters in Organizational Development and Knowledge Management at GMU since 1996, as well as in other degree programs in the School of Public Policy. Her research interests include organizational change, knowledge creation, conflict and change, group dynamics, cross-cultural dialogues, and virtual conversations. She's the author of numerous publications related to her research, including her new book, Catalytic Conversations, Organizational Communication and Innovation, which was published in January 2010. Congratulations. Her previous book, Conversational Learning, An Experiential Approach to Knowledge Creation, was published in 2002. She received her PhD in Organizational Behavior from Case Western, her Master's in Public Administration from the University of Tennessee, and a BS in English from College of Charleston. What's a BS in English? Really? BA in English, and I said, wait a minute.
I noticed there's a lot of BS in English.
Somebody can say. Dr. Scherrens has held the position of Senior Vice President since 1996. In this role, he retained all his former responsibilities as Executive Vice President and Chief Business Officer and assumed expanded responsibility to include direction and management of, and this is a list that made me tired reading it, so thank you. Facilities, construction management, physical plant, campus police, institutional planning and research, and support service operations. As Senior VP, responsibilities include increased visibility with state legislatures and executive officials in Richmond, while sharing executive management responsibilities for internal operations at the university with the provost. Dr. Scherrens provides oversight and development responsibility for a $900 million annual operating budget, as well as leadership on operational guidance to intercollegiate athletics, fiscal services, human resource management, auxiliary enterprises, legal affairs, budget and planning, and regional campus operations. Responsibilities also include coordination with business and community leaders in surrounding local jurisdictions. And Dr. Scherrens has served Mason in various managerial positions since 1972. Thank you. His service to the university and academic community is reflected in 15 years of participation in Southern Association of Colleges and Schools institutional assessment. So I personally thank you for that. We have an important deadline today. As well as institutional assessment process, as well as the NCAA recertification process. His consultation, advice, assistance in performance measure evaluation, and review of potential best practices has been provided to over 30 institutions through his Saxon Alden. And he's also chaired numerous NCAA intercollegiate athletic program recertifications. He authored a best practices business book in '99 entitled Agile Archers Moving Targets, which was published by the National Association of Colleges and University Business Officers. Dr. Scherrens received his doctorate in higher education from the University of Southern California in 1988, his Juris Doctorate from George Washington University in '76, a master's in business administration from Central Michigan in 1971, and a bachelor's in business administration also from Central Michigan in 1970. So thank you for coming and being our questioners. Our speaker today is Dr. Nance Lucas, who's an Associate Dean and Associate Professor of New Century College in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences here at George Mason. She's the former Interim Director of Higher Education Program and the Bachelor of Individualized Study program. Nance is an adjunct faculty member with the Gallup organization, an affiliate faculty member in the higher education program at Mason, and she co-chairs Mason Leads. She received a PhD in college student personnel with a concentration in leadership studies and ethics at the University of Maryland, a master's degree in college student personnel administration, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in industrial psychology, both from Penn State. Her teaching and scholarship interests focus on ethics, leadership, and positive psychology. Nance is the co-author of a book called Exploring Leadership for College Students Who Want to Make a Difference. It is now in its second edition with Jossie Bass, and she's the author of chapters and edited books. She was the co-editor of the Journal of Leadership and Organizational Studies for Special Issues, a member of that journal's editorial board. She's a contributing author of Leadership Reconsidered and the Social Change Model of Leadership Development, and she has delivered over 100 keynote presentations on leadership. Thank you. Today in her presentation, Nance will discuss transforming or generative leadership. A major premise of transforming or generative leadership is that it begins with self-awareness and leads to positive, meaningful change. This interactive brown bag will explore connections among transforming leadership, generative leadership, consciousness, and positive psychology. Thank you for Nance.
You all may have received an email or two about this brown bag discussion today, but I received about 20 emails from Lynn and Ann saying, Nance, keep it short. Keep it 20 minutes. So I want to sort out, it reminds me, I just, last semester, I'm going to stand up because I usually stand up when I talk. I usually walk around, but I can't do that. But last semester, I just got back to my student teaching evaluations from last semester. And how many of you teach? Okay, so you know, I mean, it's very humbling, experience to go through this evaluation and read what the students have to say. I'll share this one with you. One of my students said, if I only had 20 minutes left to live, I'd like to spend those 20 minutes with Dr. Lucas, because every minute with her seems like an hour. So you can put that in my perspective over here for the next 20 hours. What I'd like to do on the theme of brevity, if we could quickly go around and if you could say your name and quickly just say kind of what one thing you were drawn to when you saw the topic, what inspired you to come here today. And Al, let's start with you. Just keep going around. I'm
Al Cortez with New Century College. Leadership to me is something that needs to be nurtured, and that's why I'm here.
Suzanne Scott, and transforming and generative were what brought me here.
Thank you.
Lynn Constantine in the School of Art, and aside from the fact that I kind of have to be here because it's my baby, also I love the question, the way that the topic is formed as a question, and so I'm hoping to hear the answer.
But I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Karen Studd, also on this brown bag committee, so in a sense have to be here, but actually really want to be here. And generative.
Vicki Kirsch, I'm also on the committee, but wanting to be here. And I just vote towards transforming and generative.
Rose Pascal, I'm not on the committee, but I'm still drawn to being here. Nance, Morrie, and Ann are interested in being here too.
My name is Stephanie Moorhead. I'm with Mason, and I'm actually a New Century alum. And I just really enjoy learning more about leadership.
Rachel McCourt. I attended the consciousness one, so I just kind of.
Bobby Zarian. I'm a neuroscience student at Pratt now, so I'm interested in the brain. I was drawn by consciousness. I don't know much about transformation, but it's true.
Paris Call with communications, also with the brainwave interface, interested in making a difference, and New Century College.
My name is Rhoda Newman. I've been a student of consciousness and transformation all my life, I guess, and I'm very excited to see it in the context of a college environment.
I'm Renee Sandell, and I train art teachers to be change agents, and I'm very interested in that whole question and thinking about leadership issues that happen everywhere from the home with parents these days all the way to our international leaders.
I'm Lori Muller, and I work with the ELI, so I work with lots of international students. And I think when they're here, they feel like they're not leaders. They kind of have to follow our way. So I was just kind of curious, you know, how I can help them view themselves as leaders.
I'm Michael Galvin. I'm on the Brown Bag Committee and the live streamer, and I'm here because I was at the first three, and at this stage of the game, we evolved from speaking about consciousness to transformation, and I couldn't miss it.
I'm Karen Wolf. I'm a technology coordinator for University Life, and I'm here both with Michael in sort of a technical capacity, and I'm interested in the question of making a difference. What can we do that makes differences in lives?
I'm Mark Thurston. I'm the Senior Fellow for the Center, and I think the words consciousness and transformation are elusive words, but leadership is something pretty specific and really allows us to talk in a very pragmatic way about what these overarching terms are all about.
Stacy Gunther, Program Manager for CCT, and I think leadership in itself is a provocative topic, so it's wonderful.
Mike Justy, I'm Mark's TA, and both him and Stacy brought me here. I didn't know what the topic was until 5 minutes ago, but it sounds really interesting.
I'm Linda Kovac. I'm over in IT&E in Corporate Relations. I knew Nancy Delasky, who funded this particular project. And I have always been a big believer in positive psychology. My bachelor's actually is in transformational psychology. And so this is near and dear to my heart. And leadership, of course, is something we need to look to with all these young folks that were around here in the college.
Good morning, I'm Tamar Tchevsky. I suppose I'm the only engineer in this room. And today in the morning I worked on a paper on generative representations in inventive design. And I am attracted, of course, by the concept of generative leadership, which I suppose is related to the generation of new ideas and applied creativity.
I'm Anne McIntyre. As you know, I know a little bit about transformative leadership and transformational leadership from my experience in organizational communication, but the notion of generative leadership and that creative sense of generating is really fascinating to me. People have anything to say about that.
I'm Lois Tetrick. I'm the director of the Center for Consciousness and Transformation. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Nance has to say about transforming generative leadership after having many conversations with her.
On trains, on airports, car rides.
I'm Gary Krebs. I'm in the Department of Communication, and I'm eager to learn how to become a transforming generative leader. I'm a big fan of Nance, so to hear what she has to say.
I'm Sandra Patrick with Regional Campuses. I too am a fan of Nance's, but I'm also very interested in positive psychology, and relating it to leadership I think is a really important area of study, so I'm interested in learning more from you.
I'm a Rebel qualitative research in higher education, and I'm interested in personal characteristics of being a leader, not just role-based aspects like administration and management.
Ann Baker, and I'm here because Lynn asked me. But I'm also really, really glad because I particularly want to hear Nance.
Pam Patterson, University Life. I'm here because it was a great topic and super people talking about a great topic.
I'm Morrie Scherrens, and I couldn't add anything beyond what you all said. I'm just waiting here.
Sorry, Nance, you're turning us off.
Let me just say, you know, I've been a student of leadership for a little over 20 years. This is my passion. This is my life's work, and so thank you for allowing me to share my own way of how I make sense out of this, I think, very abstract word that we call leadership. Stacy was talking to me this morning, asking me how I was doing. I said, I'm really nervous. And she's like, well, why don't you do this, you know, all the time? And I said, yeah, but the difference is where I do it, I get to leave. When I'm done here, like, you're stuck with me. So this is, I'm going to make the connections, you'll see in a moment. I'm going to go through things very quickly. I have a lot of content, but I want to kind of get some common ground and then we'll have responses and Q&A. I'm happy to share whatever, and hopefully you'll ask each other questions. I don't have all the answers, actually. But I'm going to show the connections in a framework along transforming leadership, generative leadership, positive psychology, and self-awareness. Okay, so those are kind of the major concepts that, in my mind, all make sense and fit together when we talk about leadership processes in meaningful, positive, transforming change. So this actually talk is going to be the fall semester consciousness and the spring semester transformation. I don't have time to get into, you're not going to walk out of here feeling developed as a leader. That's a lifetime journey. But hopefully you'll walk out of here with maybe some new cognitions, new ways of thinking about leadership. But I want to share a few of my favorite cartoons, I think, that get at some of the themes we're going to talk about in a few minutes. This is one of my favorites. Geese flying in V formation, the lead bird hits the pole. It's a hazard of leadership. Oh, this is kind of small. Two people talking, and the one person says, "What was that something or other about being a good listener?" That's a rough crowd already. Another cartoon manager leader type saying, "Remember, you can fool some of the people all the time. Those are the people we really need to concentrate on." Which is exactly what Enron did. Leader manager type saying, "Get me everything you can on scapegoats." Another reality of leadership. I just want to start with a story I think that really gets at some of what I'm going to be talking about. One evening, an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about this for a minute and asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." And I think that's really, the essence of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. If you think about leadership, we've had significant paradigm shifts in leadership over the last couple decades. The old tell, command, positional leadership is the old paradigm, but you can see some of these shifts that we used to focus on hierarchy, person at top. Now we're talking about a web. It's about, leadership is relational. Leaders kind of made it all make sense for us, gave us kind of our marching orders. There was some order, some certainty about it. Now we live in uncertain times, so leaders help us work through lots of ambiguity. Leadership was about plan change, and now it's fluctuations for transformation. Leaders did all the talking, all the explaining. Now leaders have great questions and listen. Okay, leaders used to have all the answers. Shift is asking really great questions. Okay, so these are just some of the paradigm shifts. Doing versus now being, which I think fits so nicely into the whole idea of consciousness. The old model is setting limits for people. Now it's setting expectations and cutting people loose and getting out of the way. The old paradigms of leadership with skill development, leadership books in the 80s looked like recipe books. Do this and this and this. Here's all the ingredients you need. Here's all the skills you need. And now you'll be a great, effective leader. That's not, we know that from the research that it's not effective. Now it's about personal and talent development, taking your unique talents and leveraging those for facilitating change. And by the way, when I talk about leadership today, my assumption about leadership is that you don't need to hold a formal position to engage in the leadership process. In fact, some of the best individuals who make major transformations don't hold formal leadership positions. And we'll be talking about lots today about leaders, meaning the individuals, and leadership, meaning the process. Okay? The earliest work around leadership awareness really began with Dennis back in the 70s with this idea that the most effective leaders understand that in order to facilitate leadership with others, I sort of changed that a little bit from Dennis's original idea, but leadership with others, they have to know themselves well. So it's the consciousness side of CCT. It starts with the leader or leaders himself or herself. Right? The self-awareness meaning, what does that mean in terms of the context of leadership? Knowing strengths, knowing non-strengths, understanding why you lead. And many times in leadership situations, people just march in, divide the tasks. There's no thought to a philosophy, a framework for why you lead and the kind of impact or legacy you want to have. We also know from the research and Van Door's work that knowing that developing self-efficacy, leaders themselves and everyone in the leadership process results in higher performance capacity. We know this especially on research around teams, high-performing teams. Self-awareness also means knowing our core values, understanding those well, and leading with them versus having a separate set of core values outside of the leadership process. And recent research in the last 7 to 8 years on authentic leadership, knowing self, the self-awareness component, is essential in authentic leadership. How many of you, we'll just take a step, take a guess, how many formal definitions in the literature are there in leadership? Just take a guess. 100. 1,000? 58? Any other guesses? 4,000. I make my students in my class memorize all of them, but there are over 4,000 formal definitions of leadership. I'm going to pull out just some of them that I think really do and talk about leadership in a positive light, positive change, and transformation. Versus, my own from our book, Exploring Leadership, that leadership is a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. And we use that word intentionally in our definition based on our own collective research. And also, Hitler, for example, does not fit into our definition. Was he a leader? Yes. Does he fit into this definition? No. Okay. One of the most cited definitions on transforming leadership is by Burns, who describes leadership as a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of motivation and morality, and goes on to say that transforming leadership also transforms followers into leaders, into moral agents. And the research on transformational and transforming leadership does correlate with superior performance and positive morale and positive employee well-being. So transforming leadership, Burns' work, followed by Bass, is now recently has been cited in positive psychology research on having a positive emotional effect on people in the leadership process. Okay, why? Because it intentionally is connecting people and focusing on human development. leaders doing that in the process. One of the most recent definitions on generative leadership, which, by the way, there is not much written on the topic of generative leadership yet. I think that should be a CCT book that comes out. That's actually, I think, where more research is needed, but one of the recent definitions is enabling others to engage and align their strengths of character. Here's the positive psychology piece of it, the strengths of character and capacity in an open environment of positive energy to achieve a shared purpose and create a better future. When you hear this definition, you see this definition, what comes to mind for you?
Education.
Education, what else?
Cybernetics.
I'm sorry?
Cybernetics.
Yes. Okay. What else?
Subjectivity of the word better.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. Many of these leadership words and leadership definitions are they're difficult to measure, actually. Okay, what else? Ethics. Ethics. Okay. How many of you would want to be in this kind of leadership process that's described here as generative? Okay. One of my mentors, the late Don Clifton, who is the author of the Strengths Finder and one of the grandfathers, actually, of the positive psychology movement, really inspired me to connect my own work in leadership with positive psychology. And he had a meeting down at Gallup. It was the first World Congress on Positive Psychology, and he had 6 people in the room. Morrie Scherrens was one of them. And we talked about this whole movement of positive psychology, what it was and what it isn't. You know, it's not that happy, smiley face. You know, that's not what positive psychology is. But that was the first time, and it was in 1999, the first time we really had a conversation with some of the researchers in the room about making the connection between leadership and positive psychology. And Morrie Scherrens said, well, actually, no one's going to be interested in that. And here we are. I think, obviously, once the connections were made formally around positive psychology and leadership, people are inspired, by that kind of effect in organizations and in teams. We often, in organizational settings and in human life, we focus on what's wrong about something or what's wrong about a person. Okay? And the focus in leadership and positive psychology is to focus on what is right, what is good, what are the talents, what are the strengths that everyone brings in the leadership process. I just want to put this into context with you in terms of the history of the field of psychology itself. You draw up a couple, just to, again, underscore the focus on negativity. In a review of 100 years of literature in psychology, 8,000 articles were published on anger, 58,000 were published on anxiety, 71,000 were published on depression, for a total of 137,000 articles on what's wrong about people. There were 850 published on joy, 3,000 on happiness, and 5,700 on life satisfaction, for a total of only 9,550. So you can see that's starting to tip a little bit. And we're starting to have, I think there's probably now, within the clinical psychology, there's now probably about 4,000 labels, clinical labels, on what's right about people compared to 40,000 on what's wrong about people. Okay, you can see how that obviously relates to the leadership process. Barbara Fredrickson, who's actually going to be here in March, so if this is a topic that interests you, we're having a whole conference with some of the major scholars in the field on March 19th on leadership and positive psychology. In her own research, she identified, she also worked with a mathematician, and they studied teams. And they looked at their productivity and satisfaction. And what they found was a positivity ratio. So in their research on the teams that performed the highest, the high-performing teams, there are 3 positives, 1 negative. And for the low-performing teams, the lowest, it was 1 to 1. So in studies on relationships and marriages, I think for marriages it's like 5 to 1, 5 positives to 1 negative. In team situations, it's 3 to 1. Kim Cameron, who also will be here in March, his most recent book called Positive Leadership focuses on his research looking at leadership. And he described positive leadership as having 3 connotations. The first one is a focus on positively deviant performance. I love that term. Yeah. Positively deviant performance, which means, you know, successful performance that dramatically exceeds the norm in a positive direction. So it's extraordinary performance. It also refers to an affirmation bias. Again, the focusing on what's right about people, their strengths, their talents, their capabilities, their capacities, and affirming the human potential. It emphasizes positive communication, optimism, and strengths. Those of us who work in this field, often, you know, we're talking about leadership, we'll use different words and catch ourselves and be more conscious about not even using words that describe negativity. So it also shows up in communication as well. But the one thing I want to also point out that positive leadership doesn't ignore the negative events. Okay, so and the same is true in leadership. When we talk about tapping the talents and strengths of everyone in the leadership process, we're not saying ignore the weaknesses. You can learn a lot about the weaknesses. We're saying align yourself to have complementary, synergistic talents and strengths with each other. Okay. And again, it goes back to the self-awareness piece. The third connotation of Cameron's work focuses on facilitating the best of the human condition, or on focusing virtuousness. So it's an inclination that all of us want to work towards goodness and some intrinsic value, that all people have good intentions. Okay, we already talked about this. Okay, I also want to talk about a critique of the positive psychology field and something to be careful about. We know this for a fact, and also the social science research, that negativity does have a place in human flourishing. Okay, it does have a place in human flourishing. Negative news sells more than positive news. We focus more on the negative. We're socialized to focus more on the negative, focus more on positive, negative feedback than positive feedback. So it's like when you get back your student teaching evaluations, which ones do you focus the most on? That one bad one out of 100, right? Good ones. In performance evaluations, you know, oftentimes people will say to me, well, I get a great performance evaluation, but you know, my boss will spend 10 minutes on what I did well and 40 minutes on my weaknesses and how I can improve my weaknesses. So there is something about negativity that does move people in the direction of human flourishing. In a comprehensive review of the psychological research has summarized this conclusion, pointing out that bad is stronger than good. Bad is stronger than good. Human beings react more strongly to negative phenomena than to positive. That's just a fact. So as we're looking at making the connections of positive psychology and leadership, this piece of information about human behavior helps us because we have to shift and tip that in the other direction. Okay. Okay, lastly, I just want to end, because I know I'm running out of time, I've probably exceeded my 20 minutes. But I'll go through these very quickly. In Kim Cameron's book, and again, this is based on his research. Also, he built off of Barbara Fredrickson's research on positivity. There are 4 strategies for us in leadership to consider as we work from a transforming leadership model to our generative leadership model. The first one is creating a positive climate. The easiest way to do that is simply by modeling it yourself in your own leadership, or if you're a professor, but modeling conditions that foster positive emotions. Okay? We know for a fact, again, this is coming out of the research on teams, that does lead to optimal individual and organizational functioning. Okay? People are able to take in more information, find more meaning, find more satisfaction when they experience positive emotions. Okay, and the 3 activities you could consider for promoting a positive climate, again based on some of Cameron's research, include the fostering of compassion, the relational side of leadership, forgiveness, and there is Bruce Volio's work on authentic leadership is pulling this out as one of the positive emotions, and gratitude among employees. What's interesting, Rosebeth Moss-Cantor, who did research on world leaders, this little side note but related to it, what are the 3 words that leaders, in her research, 3 words that leaders have a difficult time saying?
I'm sorry?
I was wrong.
Okay.
And for some reason, the 2 words that leaders have a difficult time saying, thank you, it's the positive emotion. Now, in this room, this probably is not true. But if we think about this even from sort of different kinds of contexts and situations in corporate world, positive emotions from leaders simply saying thank you, it's difficult for them to do that. It's difficult for them to express positive emotions. Okay, the second strategy is creating and sustaining positive relationships that then for people in the leadership process, everyone engaged in the leadership process becomes a source of enrichment, vitality, and learning for both individuals and organizations. We also know some of the research that's coming out on positive emotions, when people receive love, support, and encouragement, and when their psychological and emotional needs are met, they tend to feel secure and their performance therefore elevated. The positive social relationships affect the hormonal, cardiovascular, and immune systems of the body. We know this from the research, thus enhancing health, well-being, and the nature of relationships themselves. Essential for any kind of leadership model that has a relational component there, like generative and transforming. Okay, we all know this, and I want you to, in your mind, or take out a piece of paper, we all know in our day-to-day lives there's positive energizers or negative energizers, right? I want you to think of 3 positive energizers. Just get them in your head, write them down. 3 positive energizers. What does, just call it out, what do those individuals do? How do they behave? What are their traits? Anyone that makes them positive energizers? What do they do?
Catalyze.
They catalyze, okay? Good one, Michael. What else?
Encourage.
They're encouraging, okay?
They value your work.
They value your work. Okay, it's acknowledged. They're appreciative. Thank you. What else?
I feel better already.
Yeah.
Inspirational.
They're inspirational.
They're interested.
They're interested in you, okay? What else?
Enthusiastic.
Enthusiastic.
They're kind.
They're kind.
They smile.
They smile.
They exude warmth and nurturing.
Okay. They exude warmth and nurturing.
There's
Okay.
also that element of authenticity. That it's
Yes.
not just, this is an act I'm putting on, it's the real deal.
Yes.
Okay. Any others?
Open to ideas.
Open to ideas.
Elicits.
Yes.
Elicits ideas.
Okay. Others.
When you bring something to somebody and they say, "Oh my gosh, this is a disaster. We'll never get that done in time." But when people say, "Oh, we need it by tomorrow," well, just let's see what we can.
Okay.
Now I don't know how to say that in a word, but it's
Positive outlook, optimistic, hope. All right, Michael.
A unifier, somebody that brings people together.
Okay, unify someone who brings people together.
Brings a sense of humor.
When they have the choice, they see the glass half full.
Yeah.
Glass is half full versus half empty. Okay, the positive emotional connection. Okay, any others? Okay, think of one negative energizer. What that person, behaviors of that person, traits of that person. Get that person in your mind for a minute. What do they do? What do they say? What are their attributes? Call them out.
Me.
Okay? Egotistical, the narcissistic leader.
I was going to say judgmental.
Judgmental.
Selfish.
Selfish.
Blame.
Sarcastic.
Blame.
Blame.
Stressed out.
Stressed out.
Nothing's ever good enough.
Nothing's ever good enough.
Dismissive.
Dismissive.
Pessimistic.
Pessimistic. Insincere. I'm sorry? Insincere. Insincere.
Condescending.
Condescending. This is depressing.
Let's come back to the other
Yeah. Yeah. How much time do you think, and now I'm going to talk about the person role now leader, put a role around this. How much time do you think leaders spend on negative energizers and positive energizers in reality?
I think there's a disproportionate amount of time spent dealing with the consequences of negative energizers.
You all agree? Just think about what our organizations would look like if the reverse were true. It's the scale of economy. It's like focusing on one bad student evaluation.
But your car could be running beautifully and everything's perfect and one nail in the tire. That's all it takes to stop it.
And it's sort of a little bit of a learned behavior too, in terms of that's the behavior that gets attention, right? So that's kind of where we go. It's the negative that has a powerful effect. I think leaders who call that out or who ignore it will find that's a strategy of creating a more positive climate in organizations. We know from studies, Bandura's work on vicarious learning and leadership, and there's others too, people will respond in organizations to what the leader pays attention to and what the leader rewards, and focuses on. So you see negative energizers deplete the good feelings. You can feel it in the room. You're talking about the negative. It's sort of like energy is getting zapped out a little bit. We're much more inspired when we're talking about the positive energizers. And by the way, positive energizers, that is not a personality trait. It is a learned behavior. I'm going to distinguish that. It is not a personality trait. It's a learned behavior. Okay? The last strategy is, from Cameron's work, is creating positive meaning in organizations among people. When people believe, and some of you already told us about a little bit, that their work is significant, that it's valued, that they find meaning in it, it's personally important to them. It does then produce reductions in stress, depression, turnover, absenteeism, dissatisfaction, as well as increases in commitment, effort, engagement, empowerment, happiness, satisfaction, and a sense of fulfillment. Means a little bit more on meaning, but ways of doing that in organizations: building a sense of community, affiliation, people are connected with each other, it's relational, highlighting the long-term impact of work also enhances meaningful. If we're only focused on the short term, the now, people don't find as much meaning in that. They see sort of the longer term impact. So much so that the impact might occur even after they left the organization. And again, associating work, aligning that with core values of individuals and the organization itself. Okay, time for should I leave the room? You do this? Or stay here?
Yeah. So they can really ask the questions.
Okay. Morrie's still writing.
So shall I go first? Okay. Nance, I really appreciate what you're offering. And I love the story of the wolves and what we feed. And hearing you and knowing you and working with you some, I am reminded of what I think is one of our challenges. I know in my area, one of the things that often comes up is that when we talk about these kinds of things, people think of them as the soft skills, and that's often the term that gets thrown around, terms like that, which is a way of dismissing the importance of something. Yeah. And one of the things that's always, what I always think about, and I've actually at some point I think I'll probably write about it because it's obviously something that I've been stirring with, is that I actually think these are the things that are the most difficult to do. Because of just exactly what you were saying. There's such a strong response to the negative, and in many ways that's what gets rewarded. Mm-hmm. It's what gets noticed, it is part of what gets attention. And being able to do those things like being appreciative and saying thank you and saying I was wrong, and another one that comes to my mind is I don't know. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of comments have to be authentic to having meaning. And they come from a fairly strong sense of self-awareness and having done one's own work, and having a sense of how that connects to the larger long-term meaning of the work and the purpose of the organization. And they don't come from a place of weakness, they come from a place of strength. And that involves a lot of deep, long-term work, which is exactly what we started with. Really want to reinforce that. I think as we've moved away from sort of an industrial model of traditional leadership, and we have to look at a very different world because we don't live in an industrial manufacturing economy, that kind of flexibility that you talked about and constant change where we don't know really what's going to happen. I think not just authenticity but congruence are absolutely critical for a leader to have. In other words, I can't say one thing and do another. And if I'm not very self-aware, I don't even realize I am saying anything. But if there's a lot of congruence, I think that the message that gets communicated is one that people can listen to and resonate with and argue with, maybe disagree with, but together you can maybe understand things better. So one of the things I really appreciate about what you're offering is a good basis of research, critical research, because I think it's one of the ways that we counter this dismissive attitude that, oh, it's just so fluffy, because I think it's the hardest way to move.
You're outstanding.
Okay, we can all go now.
And I feel bad because I've got to leave at 1 o'clock.
Oh my gosh, you should have gone first.
But just a reaction. I'm not sure I have a question. What we're talking about with leadership, and we don't usually make the connection very often, but I think what we're talking about is cognitive dissonance. And as leaders, they think that's like taboo. And what we're going through right now is what we refer to as blind spots, and that is, as leaders and as developing leaders, aspiring leaders, how strong are we with our self-awareness, and how honest are we willing to be about the blind spots that we have, because we all have blind spots. And I just asked the staff recently, as their assignment is to identify what their blind spots were in terms of leadership, and we all have them. And I was able to say, if you don't have them, others around the table can help you identify what those blind spots are. But I think the one that the takeaway, the question I have on the presentation is, I teach a course in ethics. I was trying to tie 2 courses together, and Aristotle talks about the golden mean, that it's a journey. If the domain is courage, then we know that the extremes are cowardice on one hand and foolhardiness on the other hand. And it's easy to be at the extreme. It's easy to be a coward in a situation. It's easy to see the house on fire and just go running in like a fool, and you die, and everybody else inside has died also. So it's like the journey is to achieve that golden mean. And so many leaders think that, but it's in the middle, so it must be mediocre. And I think I'm walking away today saying the extremes are, as a leader to their staff, you're the greatest. Yeah, you walk on water, and wouldn't we all like to hear that all the time? And the other one is you can't do anything right. And I think some leaders fall into the trap of, there's always this search for, it is a lot written about this in a positive way, this search for best practices. But the search for best practices, the flip side is, you're not getting the job done. And I think the challenge for us is to know the situation well enough and to understand that you're on a journey. You're trying to find just that right balance, because no group of individuals that you're trying to lead are going to be moved and motivated by one or the other. But you've given so many tips here about the tips for forging and fostering compassion and forgiveness. And I'm sort of wowed by the presentation, because there's tidbits in it that lead you to become a better leader. As long as we don't walk away, as Nance started, I think, it's saying, here's the answer, because the answer is there is no answer. The answer is knowing that there is no answer, that it's a journey, and the journey is, I think, to find Aristotle's golden mean. I second your comment about the wolves, because a lot of what we teach in the course is about how thoughts become acts, and how acts become habits, and how habits become character, and how character becomes destiny. It's all about, what are you going to feed? What are you going to feed? I have one question for you. can you, does leadership necessarily make a difference? Or does the making of a difference indicate the essence of leadership?
Well,
And I've got to leave.
Great.
But it's just it's a question I've had since I saw your title. Because I think as leadership role, you want to believe that you make a difference. But if you didn't, for whatever reason, if it didn't work, and we've all, I think we're all going to have our failures, or we're all going to have to pick ourselves up and start. But if you didn't make a difference, does that mean that you are an unsuccessful leader?
Well, and some of the research, on leadership, depending on how it's defined, unless leadership results in some positive change or some transformation, then we could argue that, well, that wasn't leadership then. Some will make that argument. And there's so much written about, is it the leader that makes the difference? And especially there's a lot written about college presidents. Are they really making the difference, or is it everyone else? Or are they symbolic? Or are they really the ones driving the transformation? And it's a great debate in leadership. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. I think the answer is around engagement. I think it is a process in which leaders facilitate engagement around a common agenda. I think that's what makes a difference, and that's often what leads to positive transformation.
But can a negative leader generate positive outcomes? I mean, it just seems like everyone's worked for people who were negative and very difficult to work with.
Narcissists.
Yes, which made the work environment so difficult that the outcomes were less than what you wanted. Just two negative leaders make a positive contribution, I guess.
Well, I'd like to respond to that, because that assumes that the leader is the one person who is overseeing the issue. And I think that more than that, more people than that can be the leader. So I have observed this narcissism. and I remained positive in many ways, not always. But I also consider myself a leader by modeling my own reactions to this person. And so she wasn't, in this case, it was another institution, and it was a dean. And while she considered herself the leader, I considered myself a leader as well. So I think that gets at what was being discussed here, how do we see leadership?
Yeah. Other responses to this, comments?
Excuse me.
Oh, by the way, Morrie left. He talked about this conversation around blind spots. Well, positive psychologists, we reframe that and we have them talk about sweet spots.
Well, I love your presentation, and I love this concept of post-industrial leadership, because it is also related to evolution of our society or civilization in general. But my question is more specific. I think that there is a big difference between a military leader who is supposed to build a bridge under fire and the leader of a bohemian community. In other words, you said a leader, but all these attributes which have been identified describe a large class of leaders. And do you know about any research about mapping types of leaders to types of attributes, trying to build a more complex picture than a leader and this large representation space, hundreds of attributes describing a leader? There are two.
Yeah, there has been quite a lot of research on this, and Bass and Avolio have measured this. But what the findings typically point to is that context does matter in leadership.
Doesn't matter?
It does.
Does.
Of
course.
And we didn't have time to really dive into that, but leadership is contextual. And even
Situated,
in,
yeah.
that's right, but even in military armed services training, the models that they use in non-war times look just like the ones I presented here. But what happens when they're on the battlefield, this all changes because the context changes, the situation changes. So yes, there has been quite a bit written on environment. The thing that's really hard with the research is really it's very difficult to measure some of these terms, especially some of the ones around emotional or positive difference, positive outcomes, better. The research on leadership, which we have decades. This is a topic that there's lots of research on. Often, there's inconclusive findings because we're really having a very difficult time measuring it. And environments and context changes all the time because the world in which we live, so it's a little
Dynamics.
difficult. And it's cultural too. Leadership is cultural. What I talked about today does borrow from Western and Eastern values, but leadership is cultural, and how we practice this here in a Western individualistic society will look very different in a collectivistic society. You know that, Gary.
I'm a big believer in situational and adaptive leadership. That the leader will find him or herself in some very different and difficult situations with strange and diverse casts of characters and constraints, and the effective leader tries to read those many constraints and adapt to them and use the best approach for that situation. Sometimes the best approach is to be a really tough love leader and to be strict, and and other times it's to be very laissez-faire and permissive and sharing. But I think the trick is to try to read the situation and adapt appropriately to develop the best style for that situation.
And some of the literature, I really believe that too, Carrie. And I think some of the literature has pointed that those adaptive leaders, the ones that have been able to do this well, they're able to do it because of heightened self-awareness, consciousness. They're able to read situations and emotions and people well because they have, that's pointed on themselves as well too. And I think that's some of the most adaptive leaders are highly sensitive, highly self-aware, conscious of their words, their actions, reading a room,